and welcome to the session on digital inclusion, access, adoption, and application. Today we're going to review current state, local, and federal funding models for digital inclusion. We're going to talk about E-rate and options to provide affordable and equal access to communication technology to all of our residents in all of our communities. If you don't know me, I'm Chris Jaramillo. I am the Cable Compliance Officer and Manager for King County, Washington, and Seattle. I'm a longtime member of NATOA and currently serve as the past president of the WATOA Board, which is the Washington chapter of NATOA. So before we get started, I'd like to take a moment on behalf of our board and our staff to thank all of our generous sponsors. We wouldn't have a conference like this if it wasn't for the generous sponsors. Especially, I'd like to call out right now to give a shout out to AT&T for today's lunch and Google Fiber for tonight's reception, which I hope everyone's going to. Okay, so let's get on with it here. So I would like to join, first off, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Corlett Hannon, who is the Senior Legislative Representative with AARP's Department of Government Affairs. Since joining AARP in 1999, Ms. Hannon has served as an issue expert primarily in the areas of telecommunications, energy, transportation, housing, and foreclosure prevention. In her position, she provides technical assistance to AARP's state offices to further their strategic engagements to state and local level legislative and regulatory advocacy. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland, College Park, and she also earned a JD from Howard University, and is a member of the Virginia State Bar. And she's also a first-time member of attending the NATOA conference. So please help me welcome, a strong welcome for Corlett Hannon. Thanks.
Thank you, and again, I appreciate being invited to participate on this panel. As was mentioned, this is my first time attending NATOA, and it will not be my last. I've had a chance to meet some awesome people and learn a lot just in the day that I've been here, so I really appreciate it. The other thing I wanted to share is that my presentation is going to take a little bit of a different route. I wanted to talk about why digital inclusion is very important for our aging population, and I'll talk about programs as well, but I've actually, since I've been here, gotten a few questions about why is AARP interested in these issues, and so I thought it would be helpful to share that type of perspective with you. So let me make sure I have this. AARP believes that access to affordable and reliable telecommunication service is a basic necessity. Similarly, we believe that access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband service is critical for successful aging. We are in the midst of a technological convergence, which I know you all are aware of. Many of us, including myself, came of age at a time when our telephone service was provided solely over traditional copper wires. Now we have networks that can provide a wide range of services, including multi-channel video, programming, broadband internet access, and telephone service, all on a single network platform. We also have nearly ubiquitous wireless service that connects to the network and that increasingly supports broadband service. AARP is very supportive of advanced telecom technologies and strongly encourages efforts by policymakers and others to help the members of our communities effectively age in place and improve their quality of life. For these reasons, AARP has expanded our advocacy to support consumer access to broadband service, particularly in the home. Our efforts have supported the expansion of municipal broadband, which I know is a big issue here. Last night at dinner, there were several conversations about the Sixth Circuit decision, so that I know that's a big issue for NATOA members, and that is an issue of importance to AARP. We have also supported state and local efforts to guide high-speed broadband deployment to reach unserved and underserved communities. We continue to refine our advocacy agenda and look forward to opportunities like participating in this panel at NATOA to help us determine where best to focus our efforts going forward. I would like to talk a bit more about why we believe digital access and the creation of programs specifically targeted toward older adult households are important, and why AARP believes that adequate funding is needed to develop and sustain programs that engage older consumers in the digital marketplace. Just as the availability of safe, reliable transportation and affordable and accessible housing are critical to making a community more livable, access to broadband service is an integral part of creating and sustaining age-friendly communities. Affordable access to high-speed internet networks provides communities with a powerful platform to meet the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities associated with an aging population. This approach to community development deserves more attention from supporters of both age-friendly communities and community broadband networks. The potential benefits of digital connectivity range from making aging safer and improving how we retire, how we live in retirement, to how we interact with smart cars and creating thoughtful homes that understand our habits. Digital connectivity also makes possible promising applications for aging in place, such as video-based virtual visits with clinicians and family caregivers, and in-home monitoring of adults with limitations of activities of daily living. At the same time, these changes lead to more complex digital landscape that challenges consumers, their ability to navigate the sea of devices, applications, accounts, and passwords. And I'm sure we all can associate with having to remember passwords, and so just think of how someone who didn't grow up using computers, that type of challenge that they face. As more of our lives happen online, the question is, are we ready? Do we have the connectivity, devices, applications, knowledge, and skills to help us meet the needs and opportunities afforded to us by digital technology? In 2015, AARP's Public Policy Institute released a new valuable interactive online tool called the Livability Index, which scores neighborhoods and communities across the United States for the services and amenities that impact our lives the most. One of the categories measured by the index is engagement, and that includes civic and social involvement. The category description states, "A livable community fosters interaction among residents. From social engagement to civic action to internet access, residents' individual opportunities to connect and feel welcomed help lessen social isolation and strengthen the greater community. The index explores and examines the different ways in which residents engage with and support their communities and how they impact livability as a whole. This category, the category of engagement, measures the percentage of residents who have access to 3 or more wireline internet service providers and 2 or more providers that offer advertised maximum download speeds of 50 megabits per second, measured at the neighborhood scale. This is clearly the gold standard. We understand that the majority of us have maybe 2 providers to choose from, but this is the gold standard that the index measures. As you'll, I guess, find out tonight at the reception of Google Fiber, Austin is one of the small number of communities that actually has 3 high-speed wireline providers available to consumers here, one being Google Fiber, Time Warner Cable, and AT&T Uverse. In other communities, again, across the nation, we are lucky to have maybe 2 providers, and one of those providers is likely to be our local phone company that provides a low-level speed of broadband service unless that network has been upgraded to provide a high-speed level of connection. And the other provider typically that we have access to is a cable service provider. So that's what most of us are dealing with. So I just wanted to walk quickly. I didn't do an interactive piece for my presentation, but I did want to show you the landing page for the index. So what you have here is an opportunity to put in the name of a city and state anywhere across the country, and then the index will generate a livability score for that community. And for the purposes of this meeting, I put in Austin, since we're here, and I wanted to show you the score that Austin receives. So here, once you hit to generate the score, you'll see that the overall score for Austin is 56. Now, no community gets 100, so keep that in mind. I don't know what the top score of the most livable community is, but for Austin, for this purposes, it's 56. And you'll see that one of the categories is the category of engagement. Now, this tool can be used for advocates who they could use this tool to show to their policymakers the score for their community, to make the case for why certain aspects of the community need attention. Also to highlight the benefits of a community. If you're a home buyer looking to determine where you want to live, you could go to the index and maybe put in the community that you're interested in and see which score they generate. And then also you have the ability to weight these different categories differently. So for you, if health is a critical aspect of a community that you're interested in, you can assign more weight to that issue. And then when you calculate your score will be based on the weight that you give to the individual categories. So I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with the index, to take a look at it. The webpage for the index is aarp.org/livability-index. So whether digital access is provided via private carriers, municipalities, public-private partnerships, or other innovative means, when affordable high-speed connectivity is widely available, a community has a critical resource to support residents of all ages. It also has an economic development tool to attract and retain businesses and jobs, and vital infrastructure to improve health care and education and strengthen public safety. At the end of the day, state and local policymakers must decide their own priorities and pursue the interests of their citizens. But one issue in particular deserves more of their attention. High-speed networks give communities age-friendly advantages in serving our aging population. Now that I've shared some reasons why AARP advocates in this space, I want to share our thoughts on some challenges and opportunities when it comes to programs and the creation of programs. Now, I again come from the Government Affairs Department. We have another group at AARP that specifically works on programs. So I'm speaking from the perspective of the part of AARP that I come from. So I'm not going to acknowledge every program across the country because I don't know of every program, but I did want to highlight a few and focus also on the FCC. We know that federal and state programs have been established to encourage deployment of broadband infrastructure to reach communities that have otherwise been unserved or inadequately served. But these programs, unfortunately, are far and few between, especially those that focus on broadband adoption for older adults. The Pew Center has shown that lack of relevance is one of the barriers to adoption by older households, but it's a perceived lack of relevance. And so we found that households that do not know how to take advantage of having access to the internet do not have the opportunity to learn or not in a position to know how the internet can help them. So again, this is perceived relevance, and that's an area where AARP is working to be more engaged, so we have folks understand that internet access is relevant to older folks. And I know someone mentioned earlier that Commissioner Rosenworcel, who I really enjoy hearing, and I unfortunately missed her, but I love to hear her talk about the homework gap and how internet access in school is critical, but it's also critical to have it at home so that students can complete their homework. And I have a young son, and he's right now at the point where he's doing his homework on the internet. So I have more of an appreciation for that homework gap. But there's also a gap for older folks. And again, it's based on perceived relevance. We know that the FCC recently expanded their Lifeline program to help subsidize broadband service for income-eligible households. We have started analyzing data related to broadband participation, and we're trying to get a handle on which states have the highest participation rates in the Lifeline program, especially now that it's been expanded to include a subsidy for broadband service. And so that's not information that I have right now, but that is an area that we're very interested in learning more about. So as we get more information about that, hopefully I'll get a chance to come back and share that information with you. But we're very interested in the Lifeline penetration rate. When it comes to the FCC's E-rate program, we know that that program brings broadband service to schools and libraries. But it is then up to those institutions to decide whether to offer digital literacy programs for older adults. The availability of such programs likely vary from community to community, but it appears that many libraries are actually taking the lead with digital literacy for older adults, and that is definitely to be commended. According to the Beanworks website, libraries have become a source of refuge for older adults caught in the digital divide. Recognizing the need to educate their user base on new resource formats, public libraries have stepped in to help those who struggle with technology, and increasingly that group is made up of older adults who have never used computers. The other thing I'd like to mention is that 2 years ago, the FCC, in recognition of Older Americans Month, their Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau actually hosted a workshop to provide information and demonstrations on online safety, communicating during emergencies, and how broadband and other technologies can be used to facilitate aging in place and telehealth. That was 2 years ago, and AARP feels like the FCC needs to refocus its efforts on technology and the aging in place issue. So in conclusion for my presentation, I wanted to share with you 3 examples of how AARP in particular is working to engage our members and the community in the digital marketplace and to help again to build that relevancy, to fill that relevancy gap. The offerings that I'm going to provide, that I'm going to talk about, hopefully will provide some valuable insight. So as we have more conversations about creating programs or modifying programs or strengthening programs, the features of these programs I'm going to discuss may come in handy, and also just to let you know what AARP is doing in this space. So in addition to the online learning opportunities that we provide through our AARP Tech Academy, and that's TEK Academy, AARP recently announced a pilot program that will provide discounted in-home technical support services through Hello Tech to our members in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and San Antonio. As Americans 50 and older increasingly are going online to connect to loved ones and to access information, 77% indicate they would still need someone else to help them learn new devices and technologies, and this is according to the Pew Research Center. Many older consumers need or prefer in-person support, especially when the device or technology in question is new. Hello Tech provides in-home tech support, advice, and sales for all internet-connected devices, including computers, printers, televisions, video surveillance equipment, and most of the new home technology, smart home technology. The company also teaches its customers, when the folks are there to do the service, they actually take that opportunity to help teach the older household member about the technology so they can become more confident in their ability to use that technology. So that's a key part of that program as well. And if this pilot is successful, the expectation is that it will be expanded to other parts of the country. The second project or program I wanted to talk about is through AARP's foundation, which is working to combat the effects of social isolation. People who are involved in their communities enjoy better health and lower mortality rates. In 2012, the Administration on Aging reported that over 12 million older adults aged 65 and older are living alone. However, among those who are able to maintain high levels of well-being, significant health benefits are evident. For example, older adults with high levels of purpose in life live longer and experience reduced risk of various illnesses, including Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, stroke, and heart disease. In response to these devastating effects of isolation, the foundation has initiated a pilot project in Baltimore, Maryland. The program participants consist of low-income folks who are 65 to 75 years old and at risk of being isolated. They are provided a pre-programmed interactive voice-controlled device called the Amazon Echo Dot, to help increase the volume of social connections, improve medication adherence, and well-being. The Echo Dot is a hands-free, voice-controlled device about the size of a hockey puck that has the ability to pick up and respond to sounds and voice requests from an average distance of 150 feet from the small built-in speaker with several pre-programmed scripts and algorithms. Such as it's able to tell you weather forecasts for your location, can give you calendar information, it can read audiobooks to the person, and will help them access music through Amazon Prime. The capability also exists to expand the repertoire of the device to include reminders to take medication or call a family member or friend. It could provide daily inspirational quotes or find out when a favorite team or activity is happening in the community, all simply by speaking to the interactive device. Finally, DoSomething.org and AARP's Mentor Up program have partnered to launch a program that I think is really cool named. It's called Grandparents Gone Wired, which encourages teenagers to teach their grandparents basic digital skills and highlights internet capabilities. Mentor Up is another program that's offered by AARP's foundation, and it's all about young people helping older adults stay connected and helping them to adjust to the many challenges that they face in a changing world. The program works to connect older mentors with people and organizations that have opportunities for them to use their technology skills to make a meaningful difference in their communities. I believe these efforts and to close the digital divide are only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do to help our older folks live more independent and engaged lives. So again, I look forward to ongoing conversations, and I thank you again for allowing me to participate on this panel.
Thank you, Corlett. Our next speaker is Aaron Wilkins. Aaron is the CEO of Human IT, a company based in Los Angeles. Human IT is a company that supports all aspects of digital inclusion for our communities and all of our citizens. On a personal note, Aaron was raised and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and attended Santa Clara University. So he is also a first-time attendee of NATOA. So we've got another recruit here, so I like it. All right, so yeah, help me welcoming Aaron Wilkins to NATOA. Thanks.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. So how do we define digital inclusion? I recently heard a quote from Jordana Barton at the Federal Reserve as defining digital inclusion as economic inclusion. And what does that mean? Economic inclusion means that we have to start involving these individuals that are not included digitally in an economic inclusion conversation as well. To give you a little bit of background, we obviously operate out of Los Angeles, California. To take a step back even further, let me give you some stats on median household hourly wages for some cities around the country. In New York, an average home costs $50 an hour for an individual to rent. Seattle, $44 an hour, Dallas, $25, and in Los Angeles, $49 an hour. Median income in Los Angeles is $56,000 a year for a household, or $26 to $27 an hour. Remember, I just said it costs $49 to rent an average home in Los Angeles. Each family would have to have a 2-earner income of $24.50 per hour. That means that per capita, if we take one of those average incomes, that's $28,000 a year, or $13 to $14 an hour. That being said, let me give you an example that I'm going to use for the rest of the presentation to talk about digital inclusion. Let's picture an individual named Sam. Sam is living in Los Angeles, makes that same $28,000 a year, and has various things that that person needs to afford throughout the year to make sure that they can live the same type of life that you and I live. Sam rents an apartment that costs on average about $12,000 a year for a regular type of apartment in Los Angeles, which is about $1,000 a month. That means that Sam now has $16,000 left to spend. Groceries, $4,000 a year. That means that Sam now has $12,000 left. Gas, that means $4,000 a year for gas or some sort of transportation cost, $8,000 left. Healthcare, approximately $1,000 to $1,500 a year, $6.5 left. Clothing, $1,000, $5.5 left. Taxes, at 15% roughly, $3,800 to $4,000 a year, now have $1.5 left. Education, about $1,000 a year. That could be a number of things: supplies, paper, other things that kids need to go to school, or even that individual family member to go to school. That's another $1,000. Now we have $500 left to spend. Tell me how that person would be able to then go afford the technology that many of you are using in this room, or even a monthly subscription rate to most of the internet service providers, some of which are even here today. That being said, we understand that some of them are providing a much more low-cost offer nowadays, but there's still a number of other things that these individuals have to do to meet their basic needs before they can even, be able to adhere to paying for something like that. So I ask you all a question when you go back to your various cities. Is technology and broadband a basic need? Do we need to assist these low income or low to moderate income? Because as I told you, $28,000 a year in LA is considered now to be low income. Do we need to assist them in helping them find these options and find low-cost technology or even free technology like Human IT provides to make sure that they can succeed and have access to the same number of things that you and I do on a daily basis? How should we invest in digital inclusion to help Sam and others? Well, even after a number of articles recently have come out talking about a lack of follow-up for technology distributions or internet signups from BTOP funding, I encourage you to think about something different. And that is the communities that you all live in or help operate and the people in those communities. So whether there's negative feedback or not about these different programs that have existed for the last 20 years, we have to develop our communities and think about the people in them. If you look at the last 20 to 30 years, what has the FCC done to help those same communities or help influence some of the decisions that we've been making? Well, in the 80s, specifically 1985, they made home phones or landlines much more affordable through providers to low-income individuals. And why is that? Because they needed them in order to communicate with others. Another thing is mobile phones in the early 2000s. Now we're talking about broadband internet, and that being another aspect of this, this area that the FCC is trying to provide affordable options and help provide guidance for all of us. So again, how do we help Sam and others use the things that we use every day? Well, we need to do a number of things. Like I mentioned, we need to develop our communities. So we need to start thinking about how that affects workforce development, and which means access, literacy, training, financial services that come along with that. So online banking, financing options, small to medium business, and things that happen when you start talking about helping those individuals that are in those same communities. Higher GDP for gigabit cities, for example. You have examples like Kansas City, which Google Fiber was in. I understand that they're thinking about not providing some of those same services, but you have other areas like Austin, San Antonio that are seeing GDP increase because of that. And that's going to be good for all of your communities as well, right? You can be the next Austin, you can be the next San Antonio and see GDP increase in those communities. Localized services, affordable housing, and healthcare for those same individuals. So how do we help Sam and others? We have to work together. This is no longer a luxury in considering broadband internet. We have to think of it as a utility. I know we've talked about this today. I unfortunately was not here for some of the other talks, but we do believe at Human IT, because I'm not speaking from a legal standpoint, that it is a utility. That's why the FCC is now providing guidance. That's why there's so many people in this room looking for help to enable these digital inclusion initiatives to succeed. And how do we do that? Well, first step, we have to provide adequate technology to these same individuals. Only 12% of technology is reused or recycled. And that is primarily coming from a number of recyclers. So if you think about reuse organizations like Human IT, we are focusing on the reuse aspect first. It's been drilled into our heads for so long that we need to recycle, reduce, reuse. Well, we think that you need to reuse, reduce, and then recycle, right? Because Reusing is going to allow those low to moderate income individuals in your communities to participate from a digital inclusion standpoint. Obviously, sometimes there is a security risk at hand when we're talking about city technology or donors that are private organizations. Well, organizations like ours and others that exist throughout the country are providing data security options now, because we understand that it's important to provide a service like that in order to be successful at then making sure those devices are distributed and that there's no security risk. Sorry about that, excuse me. Broadband options is the next step, and here's why. Young adults have increased from 70 to 96% of individuals using the internet over the last 14 years. Adults, 52 to 80%. Seniors, 14 to 56%. So we're already making great strides. But what does that mean? That still means that there is 16% overall of the population released in 2014 from the Census Bureau that still do not have access to the internet. That's 50 million people in the US, if you estimate that based on our population. Another thing that we want to mention is the US is then considered to be 18th in the world in terms of internet access. That's not good. That's not good at all. If we look at the statistics on computers in the home, 23% of Americans do not have a computer in the home. So tell me how you can do your homework on a mobile phone, even though you may have access to the internet. You need to do your homework, and you need to have adequate technology to do that homework and good broadband then to make sure that you can also do that. That means that 75 million Americans do not have a computer or some sort of device like that in the home to be able to do the things that they need to do on a daily basis, like doing their homework or applying for jobs. That means that we're the 24th nation in terms of rankings in the world in terms of computers in the home. That also is not good. In 2014, it's estimated that 50% of jobs require technology skills. In 2025, 77% of jobs will require technology skills. Do you see the trend? Programs like Connect Home and Connect Ed have tried to alleviate that problem on a federal level. Programs in different communities, like in ours, for example, Our Cycle LA, have also tried to help. There's organizations, and part of this talk is to talk about other organizations that are doing really well at providing some of these services. There's a group called Everyone On that we work very closely with, that works in a number of your communities as well, that helps identify some of the same things that the AARP's Livability Index are doing in terms of broadband access. So please use those resources and start looking at, where are these other options that might exist that maybe aren't the major providers, but also provide some sort of services to your residents. So some of the options that we have in terms of low-cost internet options that are available, now that I've kind of given you some of the statistics to think about, are made up of working together, like I said. It's private sector, it's NGOs like us, it's the government and cities like yourself, or even at the state level. You have options in the private sector like Frontier, Charter, Sprint, AT&T, Comcast, and Google Fiber now offering low-cost internet options in other areas. You have companies like Human IT helping out with Frontier and hopefully with Charter as well in the coming months to distribute devices and provide low-cost internet options to people, boots on the ground in a sense. You have PCs for People in the Minneapolis area that's doing a great job at connecting low-cost internet options to low-income families. You have other housing authorities, I'm probably going to butcher this name here, and I apologize, the Cuyahoga in Cleveland is doing a great job, and I spoke with them, at a number of different events, and they're trying to push as quickly as they can to get people connected to the internet. We have, Interconnections in Seattle, who's distributing internationally, on a large scale. New York Public Library. You have Austin Freenet here. You have some housing authorities in San Antonio and other areas as well. The next thing is citizenship and media training. So just because we have access to the internet does not mean that we now know how to use the internet properly. There are some examples there as well of organizations that you can use that will be helpful as you look for citizenship or media-based options. From a citizenship and media standpoint, Common Sense Media is doing a great job of that. We are trying to work, very closely with them, starting to try to integrate some of their services into the images that we provide on the devices we give away. Discovery Education is another one. They provide great, free resources to have access to for recipients of these types of programs. And then you have a Khan Academy who's been working really hard with Connect Home to provide some of their media and some of their training and boots on the ground at the events to make sure that recipients know that there are people out there looking to provide free resources, even if they don't know that they exist. Additional resources, I like to talk about this a lot, and we had a call before this conversation for all of us on the panel to go over what we were going to talk about. There's partnerships like the NDIA as well that's recently sprung up, and that's the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Human IT is an affiliate of that. I urge you to look into becoming an affiliate of that as well. It's plotting the map of the digital inclusion providers, all over the country. And there's also a more hardware-based and device-based partnership that is called AFTR, AFTRR, which is a Christina Foundation program, and it has recently started as well. So those two groups are kind of leading the way in terms of advocacy for a lot of these issues. You'll see the names NDIA and AFTR thrown around quite a bit when you start seeing releases, from the FCC releasing guidance on how to do things. They tend to weigh in on a lot of those things and make public comments, consistently. So is NATOA then going to be one of those groups? We're here talking about digital inclusion. How are we as a group going to weigh in on some of these, guidance-based decisions and things of that nature as well? Where do we find funding to help SAM and others in need? So this is actually my team right here. We've grown a bit since we've done this special GIF over here as well. But just so you can kind of see some of the people that are at work here to put low-income people in a position to succeed. That's our team right there. So how do we do that, and where do we find funding? Well, we apply for a number of things, and to kind of keep the conversation structured on what all of us can do here, because not all of us are NGOs, I'll specifically talk about CRA, E-rate, and contract/grant-based funding from our experience. So from a CRA perspective, in 2016, the Federal Reserve and the FDIC recently have changed the definition of what CRA funding can be used for and the definition of that. CRA, Community Reinvestment Act funding, yes. So that means that CRA funding, since I'm mentioning it in the presentation, is now going to be directly involved in how some of these digital inclusion-based initiatives are going to be funded. There is $100 billion available in CRA funding every single year. What does that mean? Well, I'll give you a little bit of a scale here. E-rate funding, in terms of what was released in 2015, I believe, only $3.9 billion was allocated to upgrades for Wi-Fi, legacy equipment, and telecom-based upgrades, or RFPs. So there's quite a bit of funding in consideration to E-rate and some of the other programs that are out there to affect digital inclusion-based decision-making for all of us. And then there's obviously contract and grant-based funding as well. So Human IT specifically has dealt with a number of those things. We're applying for some CRA funding at the moment right now. I don't have a lot of experience in E-rate, so I won't really focus too much on that. from a CRA funding perspective, there's a number of ways to go about that. So the reason why they're reallocating the funding is because they're saying that it's going to affect those same financial institutions that are lending or investing in those low to moderate income communities as well. So you have to prove that you have affected, from a metric standpoint, adoption of financial technologies, or increased, the increase or decrease the different types of metrics in those industries. For example, teller-based transactions have dropped 40% in the last 20 years. So if you can show that some of those things have changed because you've put on a digital inclusion program, which has then given them access to that financial institution's app or software to then allow them to do banking online or something of that nature, you can go after the CRA-based funding. So there's a lot of different implications to talk about there. How they do that and how you have to prove that is they generally say there's 3 legs to the stool. There's the technology that you're providing, technology to give them access. Like I mentioned before, there's digital inclusion training that you have to provide. And then there's technical support as well that you have to provide on the back end. So from a contract grant standpoint, because I obviously don't have a lot of experience in E-rate funding, we do have experience in that. A number of our programs have been funded specifically by the California Emerging Technology Fund. They have granted funds to us for various programs, like the R-Cycle LA program in Los Angeles. Human IT refurbished 2,600 devices in less than 9 months, provided data security and inventory controls and a number of other things for 10,000 devices in a year with a very small team. We have won contracts for Connect Home, which is a HUD-based program, as all of you know. So there's a number of different ways to fund these programs, and I urge all of you to, like I said before, work together. Let's write grant agreements together. Let's get different partnerships, situated so we can then be successful in helping those people and those communities that you guys all live in and serve. How can we, Human IT, work together to help Sam and others today? Well, we establish powerful partnerships with each other to help Sam and others. On the left are some of the programs that are our flagship programs that we are very successful at providing. One of the ones I didn't mention was Power On, because that's primarily donation based in terms of funding. We provide a program to LGBT low-income individuals across the country in terms of smartphones, tablets, and smaller devices that we can ship to centers that are then distributed to those groups. We did a launch recently in Atlanta where we distributed a number of devices through a nonprofit there. We are launching in DC in the next month, doing a donation out there. So you're going to begin to see us in some of your communities, and we would like to exist in a number of the other communities that we haven't talked to. But again, it's about helping Sam and others, right? So to tie it all together, it's about those same people in your community that we want to help. So what are the different steps that we can take to do that? I've mentioned them throughout the presentation, but let me summarize for you. Well, we need to provide data security to the devices that can be reused, which are already being used at the state, federal, local levels. I provide an example, City of LA, 10,000 machines in 1 year. We refurbished 2,600 devices in less than 6 months. We've done event planning, distribution, and logistics coordination for Connect Home, 500 devices distributed in 3 months. With Connect Home, here's some really important stats that we like to tout. 82% of the people that enrolled in the program from the get-go finished the program completely, received a computer, a device, and then was on their way to receive the training, and then has the option to receive technical support. 94% that registered for the training finished and did the same exact thing. That is fantastic. That's an outstanding rate. Another thing that we do is we help from a consulting standpoint with procurement for products and services. So if you're looking to try to figure out what is the best vendor for providing internet in your area, obviously you guys understand that there are certain providers, but there's other options, right? There's MiFi devices, there's other things that can be used based on the types of coverages that exist, and we do different types of benchmarks to make sure that those are acceptable in those regions. So in terms of procurement, we're going to be handling 5,000 internet connections for Frontier over the next 2 years, providing also free devices to those same individuals that sign up for the low-cost offer. Digital literacy training, that's another area that we can help with, and a number of other organizations are providing that across the country. One of the ones that we work really closely with is an organization called YPI, or Youth Policy Institute in Los Angeles. They do a great job at that. There's a number of other ones in your area. That's why I mentioned the NDIA and looking into that, because you can find some of those providers for just piecemealing certain things that you need. Technical support, I mentioned a little bit about that. So in an 8-month period, so this is from January to August of this year, for Connect Home specifically as an example, we handled 5,000 incoming calls and 3,000 outgoing calls. And 40 to 50% of those individuals were Spanish speaking. So we kind of have started to develop a call center mentality to where we can handle the volume of calls that exist when these digital inclusion programs are put into place. So those are all the things that we do, and I urge you to look for a provider or ask us for help in terms of your digital inclusion programs as well. We think that in order to be really successful at this, you have to provide everything within that spectrum of digital inclusion, which is having the technical expertise, being able to coordinate and understand how to plan these events so they happen successfully, making sure that they have access to the internet, and that the resources that they receive as a part of that in terms of the image are good and they've been benchmarked in terms of citizenship and what they should and shouldn't do on the internet, so that they are safe when they're using the devices, that they have ongoing training, that they have technical support on the back end, and that there's follow-up, because we understand that at the end of the day, if you don't follow up, you don't know if they're part of that economic inclusion that I spoke about earlier. So we want to make sure that they're progressing as well, and that only happens when all of us work together in the private sector, from an NGO standpoint, and in the public sector. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. So now we have time for questions, and I'll allow you to either speak from your seat if you want to, or if you want to use the microphone right here in the aisleway. Let's have some questions from our members for Aaron and Corlett.
I'm not going to shout, so I'm just going to come
Okay.
up to the microphone.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions for you. The first is for you, Aaron. You were talking about how when you did kind of like a pilot program with senior citizens, that 94% of them completed the training all the way through. What was the sample size for that percentage?
Yeah, and that's actually not senior citizens, that's the housing authority.
Okay.
Yeah, so the sample size, from my understanding, was, I believe, about 1,700 people.
Oh, that's a ton of people then.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and keep in mind, so with Connect Home, it was a little difficult in terms of the time frame that people were asked to begin rolling these services out. We started having conversations with the stakeholders for Connect Home in the beginning of December. We started working in January. So the contract, the RFP, all of that was handled in less than a month. We did this with very limited funding because I think, like I mentioned before, we understand that we all have to work together. So So what Human IT has done really well up until this point is making the most with the funding that's available. We'll tell you what we can and can't do with those funds. We'll tell you how successful we're going to be, what metrics we think we're going to hit. Because we understand that, and I'm sure all of you do as well, when you write grant proposals or when you're looking for funding sources, most of them are output based, right? So you have to really think about, can you hit those metrics with that funding, and don't try to kid yourself. Do what you can with the resources you have, and then go back and look for funding afterwards and make sure that you can tout those same metrics.
Thank you. And Corlette, I have a question for you as well. I think ARP's efforts to get seniors digitally connected is absolutely incredible, and what you guys are doing is great. But the examples that you were giving really, they work for seniors that live in areas that are already connected. So what is ARP doing for seniors that are in more rural areas that don't have broadband access at all, that are maybe the last mile type areas?
From my perspective, again, I work in government affairs, so in terms of actual programming, I'd have to get back with you with some examples. But from our government affairs perspective, our advocacy that we do on the ground in our state offices is where we help to influence where deployments are made. So for instance, in Virginia, I remember this last legislative session, there was a funding proposal to build a network, a fiber network that would help to reach those in rural communities and underserved communities. AARP supported that legislation. Unfortunately, it did not pass. There was a lot of opposition on the other side, but it's, we'll have a chance to hopefully get another bite at that apple. We've supported the expansion of municipal broadband in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Had the Sixth Circuit decision not happen, hopefully that would have helped to get broadband service to more underserved communities. So we're trying to engage, look for opportunities to engage in advocacy to show that there is a reason that broadband networks need to be expanded to help not only older folks, but other folks living in rural communities. And that's the aspect, the angle that we're taking at this point with AARP. If anyone has any suggestions, one plug I didn't make in my presentation is my role at AARP is I work with all of our state offices on their state and local advocacy efforts. If anyone is, and again, I can't, I don't have the authority to tell a state office they must engage on a particular issue, but I can give information to them to encourage them to help with local advocacy efforts. So if anyone in the room has an issue that's playing out in your community or your state that you would like to have AARP partner with you or be in a coalition with you on the effort, please let me know, because that's information I can take back to our state offices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Rick Elrod.
Let me just encourage you, Corlette, to keep up with the state legislatures. The consensus after the Sixth Circuit decision seems to be that the business of municipal broadband can't be resolved on a federal level. It'll have to be done state by state. So as with Virginia, that's, I think, what will need to happen.
Yeah, and I know, for instance, in Chattanooga, there's our state office was active in supporting municipal broadband there, so we're going to participate in a coalition to see what the next step should be to work our way around that Sixth Circuit decision.
Okay, more questions. Mitzi Herrera.
Mitzi Herrera from Montgomery County, Maryland. We're adjacent to DC. A couple things. One is AARP did a program with the District of Columbia government in which they gave devices, they provided training, and I believe they may have partnered with Comcast as well, and there was some internet access at the home provided. One of the things, though, that is very difficult is that you can only find press reports about the cost of doing that, and it makes it very hard to replicate or to say we could maybe take up something like that if you don't have some specific things reported, like how much does it cost, what's ongoing or one time, can you invest in the devices but they get reused, or so one, I would just say that's great when you do those kinds of programs, but in order to build momentum, it'd be very helpful if you could put some of the basic questions that we're going to have to answer if we try to replicate those programs. Aaron, I'm curious if you've had, one of the concerns that we've had in some of our centers, they use refurbished computers, And what we found is that when the trainers come in, there is a lot of time that has to be done with updating, because you'll get various, part of the thing of if you people were here for Mondays, of keeping things secure is you keep these things up to date. And what happens is the operating systems are no longer supported. You try to download new applications. They're not designed to run on those types of things. And so we found that while you can do some basic things, a lot of times unless you have a staff that's dedicated, which you typically don't, that's why they got refurbished computers, that becomes a challenge. So I'm just wondering, have you had to deal with that?
Yeah, and can you be more specific about who has the staff? Is it the person that's refurbishing, or is it your organization?
So we'll have a recreation center, and in there will be co-located as a senior center.
Sure.
Sometimes you have seniors who are coming there because they're part of a federal meal program. Other times they're coming and it's just exercise classes. Sometimes it's just a place to hang out.
Sure.
And in there, typically in one room, there's somewhere between 6 or 12 computers. Most often they're connected to the internet at varying speeds, but that's the problem of those machines. They're relying on a volunteer. They relied on a volunteer organization to donate the machines, and then they rely on a volunteer that keeps those machines up to date.
Well, I think that's the difference about us versus some of the other organizations that help put on these types of programs. We're not a volunteer organization. And we do provide tech support on the back end. So even devices that we distribute through our own flagship Human IT donation program, we give free tech support up to 1 year, and that's 2 calls. And then we offer a low-cost option for them to do another call. Primarily what we've seen is most of those issues are with activation-based issues. They're not with updating the devices. If there is a center like that, yes, it's definitely possible that they don't update those devices, but that's what we're here for, right? So if it's one center, it's a lot easier to handle a call from one center versus, the 12 recipients from that may have got those computers otherwise. Does that mean that we also don't support those 12 recipients? No, we do. So that's where those 8,000 calls come in that I talked about. We've figured out a way, like I said before, to do the most with the resources that are available for each program. And we reevaluate those things as time goes on. So we don't just keep using the same approach. And I think that's where the innovation comes in, and a lot of us are dedicated to making sure that we continually provide the best service in all of those areas of the spectrum that I mentioned before. To make sure we continue to benchmark those things, and tech support is one of those things, right? So you can't just always call the person, right? You maybe have to hold a webcast like this or a webinar with all of the people with the same issues. So you're not addressing every single person directly if you don't have the resources to do that. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of goes to, we get a lot of push to say, well, why can't you get a volunteer organization? What you're kind of making the point is somebody's got to be responsible for it through it's a partnership with an organization like yours or its staff, but it doesn't seem to work when it's just, it'll manage itself.
Well, I think it's the opportunity cost too, right? So like, how many staff hours do you guys want to dedicate to having your staff work on the digital inclusion programs versus having somebody like us or another provider in your area come in and say, hey, this is how we do it. We're actually the technical experts here. We understand the best practices. Yes, there definitely needs to be communication and oversight in terms of the types of things that come from the government organization or the ISP and how they operate as well. And those are always taken into consideration. But I think it's important to think about it from a standpoint of, yes, maybe you're paying for it, but how much are you paying if you're trying to go out and buy brand new devices or Chromebooks even that are a year old or less than a year old? It's a lot more expensive than, and going back to your original question, than reusing refurbished devices. And I think we also have to consider what is the point of the digital inclusion program, right? Is it to make sure that they have access to the internet, that they can complete basic job applications, do their homework, and some of these other things? Yes, I think that is the point. Is there still an access problem? based on the types of technology that are being distributed in other programs around the country, I think so. You know, I've heard things from other digital inclusion programs about the types of technology they're distributing, and sometimes there is a very real problem there with, do things become out of date over time, right? So I think that's why I say we have to all work together, because if you guys are doing a refresh and you know there's something that can be good done with that versus sending it to the local recycler down the street and then maybe getting pennies on the dollar for what you paid for it, I mean, you guys have already written off the asset, right? So at this point, like, isn't it better to then reinvest those same machines in your community and see what happens from a GDP standpoint of how they rise up as you give them those same devices. Right?
So we have been partnering with, we just have a new pilot with OATS, Older Adult Technology Services, Tom Camber's organization. One of the things that we're piloting is whether they can provide training so that some of our library staff can become trainers on site in the location because they're offering those types of courses. We're looking at how we can find more partners with particularly banks and healthcare organizations, other types of people who may be willing to donate some devices, particularly smartphones in low-income communities. But I'm curious if and I will also say that we're trying to also take an approach that if you really want to excite people about technology, we should also make an investment that doesn't treat it like you can have the leftovers. You can have an unattractive basement space that you can come. Instead, it looks a lot more like an Apple store or something. But just Chris, last question would be,
Yeah.
have you found in jurisdictions where you've had a staff person on the government side whose whole job it is to promote digital inclusion, significant improvements in either the number of programs that they have or their ability to make partnerships? Just how important is that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think, you know, especially with the city of LA, like, I give them a lot of credit for this. They understand that this needs to be an ongoing thing, right? It's not a publicity stunt. It's not you know, one of the questions that they asked us in the presentation is how are federal, state, and local organizations doing with making sure they continue to fund these types of things? I think you're starting to see that it's important. I mean, obviously, all of you are in the room now, right? We're talking about digital inclusion right now, so it's important. And I think that we are all understanding that this needs to be an ongoing thing. This isn't just a pilot program or an event. We have to think about what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years with digital inclusion. It's not just for this grant. Now, do you have to go after funding for just this grant to make sure that it continues for 3 to 5 years? Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people around the country that are doing a really good job of that. David Keys in Seattle, you know, I spoke to him at length at the NDIA conference a couple months ago. You know, he's doing great work in Seattle with making sure that there are these partnerships. Joining that same NDIA listserv that I mentioned earlier, I get countless emails a day, which sometimes is a bit annoying, but at the same time, there's, you know, I get 12 to 13 emails a day that come in and say, you know, this is what's going on in this city with digital inclusion. This position's open, and people are hiring for, like, community technology managers to make those types of decisions that you're talking about, because they want to know who are the stakeholders in the community that, one, already are reaching that same demographic and are doing a good job of that in those communities. Now, does that mean that there might be somebody better? You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't think that we're the best at doing that in your community, because I think we are, and I think we could be. But in the meantime, you always have to help the people that are in that community, and that has to be your most important goal, right? It's not just about the partnerships. Think about the people first. The partnerships will be there, right?
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Before you go, I'm sorry, can I get your card?
Sure.
Because I would like to maybe connect you with the person who facilitated the program that you were talking about
Terrific.
in DC to make sure that information that you think would be helpful is made available.
I'd be
Great.
welcome.
Okay.
Okay, one more question?
Actually, Mitzi stole my question. about the role of local government. So that was mine. But Corlette, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about that and what you're seeing, you know, on the national level with your advocacy work and state by state. Like, what do you see as the role of, you know, local government in partnering with AARP and, you know, the work that you're doing on the advocacy end? And also, I was just wondering about the funding issue. And I know, Aaron, you touched on it briefly. But you know, is there movement in other organizations besides those of us here and maybe the community media folks around you know, a more sustainable funding source like a digital equity fee on, you know, communications providers or something like that around, you know, advocacy around the national level? So,
you wanna
Corley,
take the first one?
yeah,
Sure,
could
I'll
I-
start. I would say that, again, our background on advocacy and telecommunications has really focused on telephone service. It hasn't been until the last couple of years that we started getting more involved in broadband. So in response to your question, I would say that making us aware of where we should be engaging on the issue. Again, when the issue came up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the reason why AARP got involved was because we were on a site visit. We have a National Policy Council that every year meets and refines AARP's policy on the issues that we have policy on. And during the meeting, we found out about the issue with the municipal broadband that was playing out in Chattanooga. That's when we became involved, because that's how we found out about it. So to the extent that local governments can make us aware of where AARP should be engaging to either help the local government out or maybe help with programming or outreach or something like that, I think that communication is what is really needed. The other thing, on the state level, again, we're trying to find our way with where we should be focusing our efforts, and so we're looking at deployment, opportunities where we can engage to help with or influence decisions about deployment of broadband networks, and where our voice would be helpful to make it aware that older people need and would benefit from that deployment, then that's where we would look to get involved. But again, I think it's communication and making AARP aware of where we should be playing in this space, because again, we're kind of new to it, and we're figuring out where we would be most influential.
From a funding standpoint, I do agree with you that there's an option to do something like that with, you know, one of the basic utilities, which, you know, in this case is broadband. I think the CRA funding is going to be very powerful. You know, I spoke to Jordana at NDIA's conference a couple of months ago as well. You know, I've listened to a couple of her webinars since on the topic, and they are already training the financial institutions to understand what's important about a digital inclusion program, and also how that relates to the financial technology, like I mentioned. I think those things always go hand in hand, right? So what is the importance of providing the technology and the broadband? It's to make sure that the resources are there for people to succeed, one of which is a financial technology, and the banks understand that. So as they start to lend or invest in those areas, you know, we've already seen that happen before CRA funding switched directly to involve the definition of digital inclusion in the guidance. You know, Citibank was a funder in the R-Cycle LA project from a training standpoint, and I think that's because we're always trying to think about how can we help the communities do better where they're not being successful because they don't have the resources that they need. So I think, you know, I would urge all of us again to really consider that CRA funding. Like I said, $100 billion. It's a lot of money. That's CRA funding in general. That doesn't mean that all of that's going to go to digital inclusion programs, and we're talking about that being lent and invested through financial institutions, right? So you can apply for a line of credit or a loan, or even just to get a grant from a financial institution for a specific project that has deliverable results, right?
So they're going to give grants?
Let me, I can actually speak to that. Gabriel Garcia.
Yeah, Gabriel. Just I
I'm
guess
with
one last question.
San
Yep.
Antonio. I'm the president of the TOA. I actually have been advising the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas on this project. If you're interested in, they put out a report called the Closing the Digital Divide, a framework for meeting CRA obligations. And you can find it on www.dallasfed.org.
Yeah, and I can send you guys my presentation as well in the notes.
So
you know, in
Closing the
slides.
Digital Divide, you can just find it if you look for that at dallasfed.org. And so under the CRA, there's essentially three, the three legs that he mentioned. It's infrastructure is the first one, which is the most important one, affordability, which is the technology, and training. And so the infrastructure is really significant because the Federal Reserve System has sent a message that banks in local communities can invest in broadband networks to meet needs that are not being met in those communities. And what that means is that these banks can now make their CRA contributions locally to expand or build broadband networks in public-private partnerships or whatever makes sense in that community to reach middle and low-income members of the community, and then provide these types of supports with technology training, which would include some type of ability to have a checking account, move low-income people away from predatory lending into the actual banking system. And it's a win-win situation. Anyway, you can
Alright.
Thank
find more
you.
information at that website.
Yeah, and the link will also be in my slides in the notes section. So if you didn't write that down, let me know afterwards, and I can send you that and let you know where it's at in the slides.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for the questions, and to our very good speakers here, Colette and Aaron. Thank you. All right. They may have a few extra minutes up here at the podium if you want to come up and talk to them directly. So.
Yeah, absolutely.